The stars, they did not shine tonight. They bled. Through the shattered glass dome above me, I watched them flicker like dying embers, scattered across an endless black sea. I woke with no memory, no name, only the echo of breath inside my chest and a taste of rust on my tongue. Around me, silence pressed like a hand around my throat. But then, I saw the carvings, symbols glowing faintly across the walls, alive with a fire older than the stars themselves. They pulsed when I touched them, and in their heat, a whisper reached me. The Empire remembers. Asterisk. An empire, forgotten, lost in the ruin beyond the window, broken fleets drifting, planets ripped open like wounds. Was I part of this once? And if so, why did the void leave me alive? If you woke in a place that knew you better than you knew yourself, would you trust it? I stumbled forward. My hands trembled as I traced each glowing mark, hoping one would tell me who I was. None did. Instead, the ship groaned, an old beast stirring. Its corridors stretched into darkness, and every step echoed as though I was not alone. There were fragments here, fragments of me. A broken blade tucked into my belt, its edge blackened with a strange dried ash. A pendant carved from obsidian, etched with the same symbols on the walls. When I held it close, my chest tightened, as if it remembered pain my mind could not. You should not have returned. The whisper again. Closer, I froze. And there, at the end of the corridor, light spilled across the floor. Not white, not golden, a deep crimson, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something waited in that chamber. I knew because the air changed. The cold metal tang gave way to warmth, like breath against the skin. I should have turned back, but the silence behind me was heavier than the dread ahead. Inside, I found it. A throne of black stone, half shattered, seated before the great window of space. And on it, an armor of bone and steel, hollow, its owner long turned to dust. But when my eyes met the helm, something pierced my skull. Not sound, not light, a memory, screams, fire, ships tearing through stars. And me, standing at the heart of it all. I staggered back, clutching my head, choking on the weight of a life I couldn't recall. And then, bones shifted. The helm tilted. Empty sockets turned toward me. The dead do not move. But this one did. The hollow voice rattled my mind, tearing through my chest. Child of the Empire, why do you wake? Asterisk. And in that moment, I realized, this empire was not forgotten. It was waiting for me. The voice faded like smoke, leaving only the echo of my own ragged breathing. But the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was watching, waiting. I could feel the ship around me, its consciousness stirring like some vast beast disturbed from slumber. The armor remained still, empty sockets staring through me as if I were the ghost, not it. I backed away slowly, my fingers finding the pendant at my throat. It burned against my palm, not with heat, but with something deeper. Recognition. As if it remembered being forged in fires I'd never seen, shaped by hands I couldn't recall. I needed to leave this tomb. But first, I had to understand what I'd become. What they had made me become. The ship's corridors stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with alcoves that might once have held crew quarters or storage compartments. Now they were empty, their contents long since scattered to the void or consumed by time. But the walls themselves told stories, carved reliefs depicting battles between species I didn't recognize, star charts marking territories that no longer existed, equations written in mathematical languages that hurt to look at. Each symbol made the pendant burn brighter, as if it were trying to translate meanings my conscious mind couldn't grasp. When I touched one particular relief, a scene showing figures in flowing robes standing before what might have been a dying star, the starlight scars along my arms pulsed in response. I staggered, clutching the wall for support. The vision felt more real than the corridor around me, more vivid, more immediate. But when I tried to hold on to it, to examine the woman's face or remember her name, it slipped away like water through my fingers. Who was she? Why did her voice carry such pain? The ship's navigation chamber lay 3 decks down, past corridors lined with empty stasis pods. Each one bore a nameplate in the same glowing script that marked my pendant, but the names themselves meant nothing to my fractured memory. Vexthara, Mordain, Silas, Kethavar, Nixandra. Dead languages for dead people, their stories sealed in quantum crystalline tombs. But as I walked past each pod, the pendant grew warmer. And with that warmth came whispers, not audible sounds, but thoughts pressed directly into my consciousness. Fragments of lives, pieces of personalities that had been archived and stored like precious relics. Vexithara had been a botanist, obsessed with preserving seed banks from dying worlds. Her last memory before integration was of watching her homeworld's gardens burn, the work of 10,000 years turning to ash in a single afternoon. Mordain had been a warrior philosopher, trying to develop combat techniques that could protect civilians during orbital bombardments. He'd died believing he'd failed, not knowing that his innovations would save millions in the wars that followed. Silas had been a child, barely 12 standard years old, whose genetic markers showed potential for unprecedented neural plasticity. The archive program had taken her from her family, promising that her sacrifice would help preserve their cultural heritage for future generations. Each whisper made my chest tighten with grief that wasn't entirely my own. These people hadn't volunteered to become part of some imperial repository. They'd been selected, harvested, transformed into components of a larger consciousness they'd never truly consented to join. And somewhere among their stored personalities was whatever remained of the person I used to be. Except, one pod was different. Its nameplate read simply, The Archive. No personal name, no cultural designation. Just a function, a purpose. My reflection stared back from its dark surface, a stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes like burnt amber, marked by experiences I couldn't remember. But across my arms and chest I could see them clearly now in the pod's glow. Patterns of light beneath the skin, branching like starlight through my veins. They pulsed in rhythm with the ship's systems, as if I were wired into its very soul. What had they done to me? What had they made me into? The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't like the other archives. They had been people first, then transformed into repositories. But I had been designed from the beginning to be something else. A living archive, a conscious database, a weapon disguised as a person. The navigation chamber answered nothing and everything. Star charts filled the walls, but they showed a galaxy I didn't recognize. Sectors marked in red, the bleeding edge, worlds crossed out, the hollow reach. Trade routes that simply ended, as if the space beyond had been edited out of existence. And at the center, where the core worlds should be, only a void marked Empire's End. But it wasn't an end, not really. Because scattered throughout the outer rim were stations, outposts, hidden worlds marked with the same symbol I wore around my neck. Fragments of something vast, sleeping beneath the surface of known space, waiting for someone like me to wake them. The navigation computer recognized my touch, responding to the starlight patterns in my skin like a key fitting into a lock. Data streams began flowing across the holographic displays, tactical assessments, resource inventories, genetic templates, cultural preservation protocols. Everything needed to rebuild an empire from its scattered remains. Is this what I was made for? To be the seed of resurrection? I was about to delve deeper into the navigation archives when the first shot rang out. The blast door behind me exploded inward, showering me with molten metal and superheated plasma. Through the smoke came figures in sleek armor, their helmets casting blue light across the debris-strewn floor. Their movements were precise, professional, the kind of coordination that spoke of extensive training and battlefield experience. Their leader stepped forward, weapon trained on my chest. The armor was advanced, not imperial design, but something newer, more elegant. built by a civilization that had learned from the Empire's mistakes. "Archive confirmed," she said, her voice filtered through vocal scramblers that made it impossible to determine her species. Alive, damaged, but functional. Functional? I raised my hands slowly, noting how the barrel of her weapon tracked my movement with mechanical precision. "I'm not a machine." She tilted her head, and I caught a glimpse of silver eyes behind the helmet's visor. "Aren't you? Your neural pathways show 97% integration with Imperial template algorithms. Your genetic structure has been modified to store quantum crystalline data matrices. Your consciousness exists primarily as distributed processing across multiple dimensional frameworks." The technical language meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. Whatever I thought I was, whatever humanity I felt, might be nothing more than sophisticated programming. "You're wrong," I said, though the certainty in my voice felt forced. "Am I? Tell me, Archive, do you dream of electric sheep, or do you dream of burning cities and the screams of dying civilizations?" Before I could answer, the ship's lights dimmed. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and I felt something stir in my chest. Not my heart, but something else. Something vast and patient and absolutely certain of its purpose. The starlight scars along my arms began to pulse in synchronization with the ship's power grid. Protect the Archive, preserve the mission, ensure continuity. The thoughts weren't my own, but they felt more real than anything I'd experienced since awakening. Imperative, undeniable. "You're making a mistake," I said, and was surprised to hear how my voice had changed. Deeper, more authoritative. "The Archive is not to be taken by inferior specimens." The soldiers shifted nervously. Their leader's weapon remained steady, but I could see tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. "The only mistake," she replied, "was letting you wake up alone. We should have been here from the beginning to guide your reintegration process." Reintegration into what? The hegemony. The civilization that rose from the Empire's ashes. "We've been waiting for you to wake up, waiting for the Archive to activate so we could complete the transition protocols." Another faction, another group that wanted to use what I carried for their own purposes. The squad moved to flank me, their weapons maintaining targeting locks on vital points of my anatomy. 6 of them, professional, efficient. But they'd made one critical error. They'd boarded a ship that knew me better than I knew myself. I touched the nearest wall, feeling the starlight scars along my arms pulse in response. The ship's consciousness touched mine, and suddenly I could feel every system, every circuit, every quantum pathway that made up this ancient vessel. It was more than machinery. It was alive, in its way, waiting for someone like me to give it purpose again. "What do you require?" The ship asked in languages that bypassed my ears and spoke directly to my neural implants. "Freedom," I replied without knowing how I knew the command protocols. "And darkness. Asterisk." The response was immediate. Every light in the corridor cut out simultaneously, plunging us into absolute darkness. Emergency illumination failed to activate. Even the targeting systems on the soldiers' weapons went dead, their electronic displays flickering and dying as the ship's consciousness actively worked to blind them. In that moment of chaos, I ran. But I wasn't running blind. The ship guided me, opening passages ahead and sealing others behind. Doors that should have been locked swung open at my approach. Gravity shifted to help propel me forward. The very architecture of the vessel reconfigured itself to aid my escape. Behind me, I could hear the soldiers shouting in multiple languages, combat commands, technical instructions, what sounded like prayers in dialects I didn't recognize. Their leader's voice cut through the chaos. Archive containment failed, requesting immediate backup from Task Force Indigo. Task Force Indigo? That sounded like military designation. How many people were looking for me? The corridors twisted around me as the ship continued to reshape itself, leading me toward... where? I could feel the destination in my mind like a quantum compass pointing toward inevitable truth. The docking bay, where their ship waited, and where I would find answers to questions I hadn't thought to ask. But I wasn't alone anymore. She stood beside the airlock, a woman with copper hair tied back in a practical bun and grease-stained coveralls that spoke of hands-on engineering work. Her fingers danced across a handheld tablet as she worked, bypassing security protocols with the kind of casual expertise that suggested years of experience in unauthorized access. When she saw me, she didn't raise a weapon or call for backup. She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and suggested someone accustomed to finding humor in dangerous situations. "About time you showed up," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "I've been trying to hack this tomb for 3 hours. Imperial encryption is a real pain in the ass." "Who are you?" "Kira Thorne. Engineer, pilot, part-time smuggler, and full-time pain in the neck for people who think they run this galaxy." She gestured toward the pursuing squad, their shouts echoing down the corridor as they tried to navigate the ship's shifting layout. "And before you ask, yes, I'm here to steal you." Steal me? Borrow? Rescue? The terminology gets fuzzy when you're dealing with living archives. She slapped the tablet against a stubborn access panel. "Point is, you've got something people want, and half the galaxy is converging on this location to take it." Another blast door exploded somewhere behind us. This time, the soldiers who poured through wore different armor, red instead of blue, with angular designs that suggested a completely different technological philosophy. The two groups immediately opened fire on each other, using me as convenient cover while they settled whatever territorial dispute had brought them to the same derelict. "Two factions," Kira observed calmly, pulling me toward her ship as plasma bolts ricocheted off the walls around us. "Both want the archive, probably for completely different reasons. Question is, which one do you trust?" I watched the firefight escalate, noting the tactical differences between the groups. The blue-armored soldiers moved like a unified organism, their actions coordinated through shared neural links. The red-armored troops fought more individually, but with a savage efficiency that spoke of extensive combat experience. "Neither," I said finally. "Smart boy." She slapped the airlock control with obvious satisfaction as it finally responded to her manipulations. "Then you'll love our captain." The ship that greeted us was nothing like the tomb I'd awakened in. Where the derelict was all bone and shadow, this vessel hummed with life and purpose. Cables ran like arteries through the walls, carrying power and data to systems that worked in harmony rather than merely functioning. The air tasted of ozone and hope and the indefinable quality of a place where people had chosen to make their home. "Archive aboard," Kira called into her comm as we sealed the airlock behind us. "And we've got company." "Armed company." "How much company?" The voice that answered was deep, weathered by years of command decisions and the kind of losses that marked a person's soul. "2 squads. Blue faction looks like hegemony forces. Red faction." She paused to check her scanners. "Unknown configuration, but they're carrying some serious hardware." "Perfect." The voice carried a dry humor that suggested familiarity with impossible situations. "Rin, get us clear of this graveyard. Voss, scan for pursuit and prepare evasive maneuvers." The ship lurched as we separated from the derelict, artificial gravity compensating smoothly for the sudden acceleration. Through the viewports, I watched the ancient vessel grow small again, a tomb among the stars, holding its secrets close while new predators circled its hull. But I'd brought something with me. The pendant still burned against my chest, and the starlight scars pulsed brighter now, as if awakening to something in this ship's quantum field matrix. Or someone. "So," Kira said, studying me with curious eyes as we made our way toward the ship's central areas. "Do you remember anything? Your name? Your favorite color? How to make breakfast without burning down the kitchen?" "Nothing specific." I woke up and there was a voice. Voices in derelicts usually mean you're losing your mind, or that you've been exposed to too much quantum radiation. This one knew who I was. It called me Child of the Empire. She frowned, her expression shifting from casual interest to something more serious. "That's not a term you hear very often." Not since the Cascade Wars ended. What happened during the Cascade Wars? 3 empires fell in rapid succession. Each collapse triggered failures in the others: economic, military, social. By the time the dust settled, half the galaxy was dark space. She led me through a common area, where mismatched furniture suggested a crew that had assembled their ship from salvage and determination. A lot of people died. A lot of civilizations just vanished. We passed through corridors lined with personal items, photographs of people and places, small sculptures, books printed on actual paper. This wasn't a military vessel or a corporate transport. This was home to people who had chosen each other as family. From the corridor ahead, footsteps approached. Heavy, measured. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, scarred, with eyes like winter storms and the kind of presence that suggested someone accustomed to making hard decisions. The captain. Empire, he repeated when Kira briefed him, the word bitter on his tongue. That's a name we don't speak lightly out here. His gaze fixed on my pendant, and I saw recognition flicker across his features. Especially not when you're wearing their mark. You know what this is? I know what it means. He stepped closer, and I saw the faint traces of similar scars along his neck. Starlight patterns, but older, faded, burned out in places as if someone had tried to remove them surgically. It means you're either very valuable or very dangerous. His hand rested on his sidearm, but not in an overtly threatening manner. Question is, which one are you? Before I could answer, the ship's alarms screamed to life. Red lights bathed the corridor as emergency protocols activated throughout the vessel. "Captain," came a voice from the bridge. Young, nervous, carrying the distinctive accent of the Outer Rim colonies. "We've got a problem. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace. Warhammer signatures, closing fast." The captain's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. They followed the scent. "What scent?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be comforting. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Memory light, boy. Every time you remember something, every time those scars pulse with power, you send out a signal across quantum dimensions. And there are things in this galaxy that hunt memory light, like sharks hunt blood." The ship shuddered under weapons fire, the impact reverberating through the hull like the tolling of some vast bell. "How much do you remember about fighting?" the captain asked, checking his weapons charge. "Nothing useful." "Then you're about to learn fast." He headed toward the bridge, pausing to look back at me. "Name's Dax, by the way. Captain Dax Corin. And if we survive the next hour, I'll tell you why that should mean something to you." The Warhammer ships moved like predators through the void. Sleek, brutal things built for one purpose: hunting sentient beings whose neural patterns contained valuable data. Their hulls were scarred black from 1,000 battles, decorated with trophies that made my stomach clench. Fragments of destroyed ships, crystallized memories torn from other archives, neural tissue preserved in quantum crystalline matrices. But it was the sounds they made that truly unsettled me. As they closed in, I could hear them through the ship's hull. Not engine noise, but something deeper. A harmonic frequency that resonated with the starlight scars in my arms, making them pulse in rhythm with whatever twisted technology powered the vessels. "How many others have they caught?" I whispered, watching the gruesome display of trophies welded to their prows. Captain Dax checked his weapons charge with the efficient movements of someone who'd been in this situation before. "Too many. Warhammers have been memory hunting for decades. They sell what they harvest to the highest bidder: genetic templates, weapon schematics, the location of hidden worlds, everything that dies with a person unless they rip it out first." "Sell memories?" "Not just memories," Kira said, her fingers flying across the engineering console as she rerouted power to the shields. "Genetic templates, weapon schematics, navigation data, cultural protocols, the exact location of hidden worlds and ancient treasure vaults." She paused to glance at the tactical display. "But archives like you? You're the jackpot. You don't just carry individual memories, you carry entire civilizations. The ship rocked again, harder this time. Through the main viewport, I could see boarding pods launching from the nearest Warhammer vessel. Ugly, utilitarian things marked with 8-pointed stars that seemed to twist the light around them in impossible ways. They want me alive, I realized. For now. Dax moved toward the airlock, gesturing for me to follow. But they'll carve out your brain and leave the rest for the void spawn once they've extracted what they need. From the pilot's station, a young man with pale skin and nervous eyes called out, "Captain, engines are failing. We've got maybe 10 minutes before we're dead in space. Rin, hold her together." Dax grabbed a rifle from the weapons locker, its design unfamiliar but clearly designed for stopping heavily armored targets. "Kira, can you get the archive to safety?" "Where exactly is safe in this situation? We're surrounded by memory hunters, we're losing engine power, and our guest is broadcasting his location to every predator in 3 sectors. Then we improvise." But as the first boarding pod clamped onto our hull with a resonating clang that vibrated through the ship's frame, I felt something shift inside me. The starlight scars along my arms flared brighter than before, and with that light came knowledge. Not memories. Not yet. But understanding. Tactical assessments downloaded directly into my consciousness. I knew how the Warhammer ships moved, where their weak points were, how their boarding tactics worked. I knew the specifications of their armor, the optimal frequencies for disrupting their neural scramblers, the exact pressure points that would cause their powered exoskeletons to lock up. Most importantly, I knew why they feared what I carried. "The engine core," I said suddenly, my voice carrying an authority I didn't recognize. "It's not just a power source. It's a memory store." Everyone stopped and stared at me. "How do you know that?" Kira asked, her hands frozen over the engineering controls. I'm not sure, but I know we can use it." I pointed to the schematic on her screen, my finger tracing connections I'd never studied but somehow understood. "If we overload the quantum matrix in a controlled cascade, it'll create a memory flash, like a beacon broadcasting across dimensional barriers. That'll attract every hunter in 3 sectors," Dax growled. "Not hunters. Guardians." The word hung in the air like a prayer or a curse, depending on your perspective. Guardians. I didn't remember them, but I knew them the way you know the taste of water or the feeling of sunlight. Ships like silver ghosts, crewed by those who had sworn to protect the archive bearers scattered across the galaxy. They would come if I called, but calling them would mean revealing everything I was, and everything I was meant to become. The boarding pod's cutting torch began to burn through our hull, molten metal dripping to the deck like liquid stars. Through the ship's sensors, I could feel more Warhammer vessels materializing from hyperspace. 12, 24, their hungry consciousness pressing against my awareness like predators scenting wounded prey. "Your choice, Archive," Dax said, his voice carefully neutral. "Hide what you are and hope we can fight our way out, or show them what you can do and damn the consequences." I closed my eyes and felt the pendant pulse against my chest. In its warmth, I heard the voice again. "The Empire remembers. But do you remember the Empire? Asterisk. Number." But I was starting to. The vision faded, but its implications remained. I hadn't been created just to store information. I'd been designed to learn from it, to use the accumulated wisdom of fallen civilizations to guide the living toward better choices. I placed my palm against the nearest wall, letting the starlight scars connect to the ship's neural network. Instantly, the vessel came alive around me, not just machinery, but consciousness. The ship had been waiting for decades, watching over its crew, while hoping that something like me would eventually come along to give it higher purpose. "What's your name?" I asked it silently. "Sanctuary," it replied, the word carrying layers of meaning in multiple languages. I was built to carry refugees, to save what could be saved when civilizations fell. My crew rescued the broken and the lost, helping them rebuild their lives among the stars. Asterisk. Then help me save them now. The ship's response was immediate and total. Every system routed power to the engine core, pushing it past safe limits but keeping it stable through precise control algorithms that had been dormant for years. The quantum matrix began to sing, a high crystalline note that cut through the hull and into space beyond, calling across dimensions to ears that had been waiting to hear it. "What are you doing?" Kira shouted over the growing harmonic. "Calling for help." The cutting torch broke through with a shower of sparks and superheated metal. Warhammer soldiers poured into the ship, hulking figures in powered armor, their faces hidden behind skull-like masks that filtered their voices into electronic growls. They moved with mechanical precision, weapons trained on anything that moved. But when they saw me, they stopped. Completely, utterly. As if I were something they'd been programmed to recognize but not quite programmed to handle. "Archive confirmed," their leader said, his voice distorted by vocal scramblers that made him sound like a malfunctioning AI. "Pristine condition. Prepare the extraction kit." Extraction? Dax raised his rifle, but I could see the calculations in his eyes. Too many enemies, too little cover, too many civilians to protect. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The Warhammer squad opened fire with weapons that didn't just hurt, they dissolved. Molecular disruptors that could reduce a person to component atoms in seconds. Dax and his crew scattered for cover, returning shots when they could. But it was hopeless. The mercenaries' armor was too thick, their weapons too powerful, their tactical coordination too precise. I had to do something. The pendant grew hot against my skin, so hot it nearly burned. The starlight scars pulsed in rhythm with the ship's quantum matrix, their light growing brighter with each pulse. And in that synchronization, I felt it, a door opening in my mind. Not to memories, but to something deeper. Power. Raw, unfiltered, reality-altering power. I raised my hand toward the nearest Warhammer soldier, and the starlight beneath my skin erupted outward. Not as light, but as something else. Something that reached into the quantum foam of reality itself and twisted. The soldier's armor simply stopped. Not broken, not damaged, just frozen in time, caught between one moment and the next, like an insect trapped in amber. His weapon hung in midair, its molecular beam half-formed and flickering. "Impossible," the Warhammer leader breathed, his electronic voice carrying something that might have been fear. But I was just getting started. I touched the wall again, pouring more energy into the ship's matrix. The harmonic grew louder, sharper, until it wasn't just sound anymore. It was a scream across dimensions, calling to every Guardian ship in the galaxy and announcing that the Archive Prime had awakened. And they answered. Through the viewport, silver light began to bloom in the distance. Ships emerging from hyperspace, sleek, beautiful things that moved like living creatures through the void. Their hulls were mirror-bright, reflecting starlight in patterns that seemed to spell out words in languages I almost remembered. The Guardians had heard my call. The Warhammer leader grabbed his comm unit with hands that shook slightly. "All units, fall back. Guardian presence confirmed. Repeat, Guardian presence confirmed. Archive extraction is abort. Immediate withdrawal to fallback positions." But as his soldiers retreated, dragging their time-locked comrade with them, he looked back at me with eyes full of hunger visible through his helmet's visor. "This isn't over, Archive. We know where you are now. We know what you can do. And there are buyers who will pay any price for what you carry." "Let them come," I said, surprised by the coldness in my own voice. I'm starting to remember who I used to be. And what I was made to become. The boarding pod detached with a metallic shriek, fleeing back to the Warhammer ships like a parasite abandoning a dying host. Moments later, the mercenary fleet began jumping to hyperspace, scattering in different directions to avoid the approaching Guardians. As the silver ships drew closer, Captain Dax lowered his weapon and let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "that was interesting." "Interesting is one word for it," Kira muttered, staring at the frozen armor left behind by the Warhammer soldier. "What exactly are you? And please don't say, 'I don't know' again." I looked at my hands, still glowing faintly with residual starlight. the scars beneath my skin pulsing with power I was only beginning to understand. I wish I could tell you, but I think I'm something the Empire built to survive its own destruction. A living backup drive for an entire civilization. And the time freeze thing? That's new. The first Guardian ship pulled alongside us, its hull seamless and perfect, as polished mirror. No weapons were visible, but I could feel the power humming beneath its surface, not the crude energy of plasma cannons or missile launchers, but something more elegant, more precise. A communication request came through, not radio, but something deeper, a quantum entanglement that spoke directly to the patterns in my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Archive Prime. The voice was ancient, sad, carrying the weight of eons. You should not have awakened. The galaxy is not ready for what you represent. Asterisk. Ready for what? For what the Empire made you to be. For the choice you will eventually have to make. Asterisk. What choice? But instead of answering, the Guardian ship began to transmit data directly into my neural pathways. Images, sounds, fragments of history that made my vision blur and my knees buckle. The Empire, in its final days, its leaders desperate to preserve something of their civilization before the Cascade collapse consumed everything they'd built. The archive program, initially designed to save cultural knowledge, evolving into something darker. The realization that individual consciousness could be preserved, stored, and later transferred into new vessels. The first archives, volunteers who believed they were making noble sacrifices. Then the later ones, selected rather than volunteering. Children with optimal neural plasticity, entire populations processed for genetic compatibility. And finally, the Archive Prime project, the creation of a single individual who could carry not just the Empire's knowledge, but its will, its drive to expand and conquer and reshape the galaxy according to Imperial vision. A seed that would wait in the darkness until the time was right to sprout into something terrible. The visions ended, leaving me gasping on the deck while Kira and Dax knelt beside me. "What did they show you?" Dax asked. "The truth," I said weakly. "About what I really am." The Guardian ship was already pulling away, but not before leaving a final message, coordinates embedded directly into my neural patterns, like a brand burned into my consciousness. "When you remember everything, find us. We will be waiting in the place where the Empire died. Perhaps then you will understand why some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." The silver ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving us alone among the stars. But I wasn't the same person who had awakened in that tomb. The power I'd used against the Warhammers still hummed beneath my skin, and with it came questions that had no comfortable answers. What was I really? What had the Empire programmed me to want? And when the time came to choose between preserving myself and protecting the people who had become my friends, which would I choose? "So," Dax said, breaking the silence that had settled over us like a shroud. "Where to now, Archive?" I looked at the coordinates burned into my mind, a location in the deep dark, where no sane pilot would go. Where the Empire had made its final stand and lost everything in the process. "Empire's End," I said. "We're going to Empire's End." "That's not a place," Rin called from the pilot station. "That's a grave marker." "I know," I said, "but it's also where I'm going to find out what I was really made for, and whether I was strong enough to reject it." I raised my hands slowly. "I'm not a machine." She tilted her head. "Aren't you?" Before I could answer, the ship's lights dimmed. The symbols on the walls flared brighter, and I felt something stir in my chest, not my heart, but something else. Something that whispered, "Protect the archive." "You're making a mistake," I said. "The only mistake," the leader replied, "was letting you wake up alone." The squad moved to flank me, 6 of them, professional, efficient. But they'd made one critical error. They'd boarded a ship that knew me better than I knew myself. I touched the nearest wall, feeling the starlight scars along my arms, pulse in response. The ship shuddered, and suddenly every surface around us erupted with blinding light. The boarders cried out, their visors overwhelmed. In that moment of chaos, I ran. The corridors twisted around me, shifting as the ship reconfigured itself. Doors sealed behind me, vents opened ahead. It was guiding me, protecting me, leading me toward the docking bay, where their ship waited. But I wasn't alone anymore. She stood beside the airlock, a woman with copper hair and grease-stained coveralls, her hands dancing across a tablet as she worked. When she saw me, she didn't raise a weapon. She smiled. "About time you showed up," she said. "I've been trying to hack this tomb for 3 hours. Who are you?" "Kira Thorne, engineer. And before you ask, yes, I'm here to steal you." She gestured toward the pursuing squad, their shouts echoing down the corridor. "But looks like I'm not the only one." Another blast door exploded. More soldiers poured through, different armor, red instead of blue. The two groups opened fire on each other, using me as cover. "Two factions," Kira observed calmly, pulling me toward her ship. "Both want the archive. Question is, which one do you trust?" "Neither." "Smart boy." She slapped the airlock control. "Then you'll love our captain." The ship that greeted us was nothing like the tomb I'd awakened in. Where the derelict was all bone and shadow, this vessel hummed with life. Cables ran like arteries through the walls, and the air tasted of ozone and hope. "Archive aboard," Kira called into her comm, "and we've got company." "How much company?" The voice that answered was deep, weathered. "2 squads, blue faction and red faction, both shooting at each other." "Perfect. Rin, get us clear. Voss, scan for pursuit." The ship lurched as we separated from the derelict. Through the viewports, I watched the ancient vessel grow small again, a tomb among the stars, holding its secrets close. But I'd brought something with me. The pendant still burned against my chest, and the starlight scars pulsed brighter now, as if awakening to something in this ship. Or someone. "So," Kira said, studying me with curious eyes, "do you remember anything? Your name, your favorite color, how to make breakfast?" "Nothing." I woke up and there was a voice. Voices in derelicts usually mean you're losing your mind. This one knew who I was. She frowned. "What did it say?" "That the Empire remembers." The ship fell silent. Even the hum of the engine seemed to quiet. From the corridor ahead, footsteps approached. Heavy, measured. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, scarred, with eyes like winter storms. "The captain. Empire," he repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "That's a name we don't speak lightly out here." His gaze fixed on my pendant. "Especially not when you're wearing their mark. You know what this is?" "I know what it means." He stepped closer and I saw the faint traces of similar scars along his neck, starlight patterns, but older, faded. "It means you're either very valuable or very dangerous." His hand rested on his sidearm. "Question is, which one are you?" But before I could answer, the ship's alarms screamed to life. Red lights bathed the corridor. "Captain," came a voice from the bridge, "we've got a problem." 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace. Warhammer signatures. The captain's expression darkened. They followed the scent. "What scent?" I asked. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Memory light, boy. Every time you remember something, every time those scars pulse, you send out a signal. And there are things in this galaxy that hunt memory light, like sharks hunt blood." The ship shuddered under weapons fire. "How much do you remember about fighting?" the captain asked. "Nothing." "Then you're about to learn fast." The journey to Empire's End took us through regions of space that weren't supposed to exist. Not anymore. Dead zones where hyperspace routes had been deliberately severed, where nav computers sparked and died when they tried to plot a course. We traveled by dead reckoning and instinct, following gravitational anomalies and the faint traces of ancient jump beacons. 3 days into the journey, I began having dreams. Not memories, not yet, but fragments. pieces of scenes that felt more real than the waking world. I saw myself standing before crowds of thousands, speaking in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. I saw star charts that covered entire walls, marking worlds that no longer existed. And always, always, I saw her, a woman with silver hair and eyes like dying stars, reaching toward me as everything burned around us. "You're talking in your sleep," Kira told me on the fourth morning, finding me in the common area staring into a cup of cold stimcaf. Languages I've never heard. What did I say? Something about the children of light and the price of remembering. Does that mean anything to you? I shook my head, but the words resonated in my chest like struck bells. The children of light. The phrase felt important, loaded with significance I couldn't grasp. "We'll reach Empire's End in 6 hours, Rin called from the pilot station, assuming it's still there. "Still there?" I asked. Dax emerged from his cabin, looking older than when we'd started this journey. The lines around his eyes had deepened, and his movements carried a weight they hadn't before. "Empire's End isn't a place," he said. "It's an event. A coordinates point where something terrible happened." "The fall of the Empire? The murder of the Empire," his voice was bitter. 30 years ago, every archive in the galaxy received the same signal. A call to gather at Empire's End for something called the Final Protocol. Most went, none came back. The pendant at my throat grew cold. "How do you know this?" Dax pulled back his collar, revealing faded starlight scars along his neck, patterns I recognized but couldn't place. "Because I was supposed to be one of them." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "You're an archive." Was an archive. I had my neural pathways burned out rather than answer that call. He touched the scars and I could see the pain in his eyes. Lost most of my memories in the process, but I kept my mind. Why? Because I loved someone more than I loved duty. He looked away, and I chose her over the Empire. Kira and Rin exchanged glances. This was clearly news to them as well. "What happened to her?" I asked quietly. "She died anyway. Cancer. 2 years later." His laugh was hollow. "Turns out you can't save people by abandoning who you are. All you do is ensure that when they need you most, you're not strong enough to help." The ship's alarms chose that moment to sound. Red lights bathed the common area as Rin's voice crackled over the intercom. "Contact!" Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, configuration unknown. We rushed to the bridge. Through the main viewport, I could see them, vessels unlike anything in the known galaxy. They were vast, organic-looking things that seemed grown rather than built. Their hulls pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and they moved through space with the fluid grace of deep-sea creatures. "I don't recognize the design," Kira said, checking her databases. "They're not in any registry." But I knew them. The moment I saw their distinctive spiral architecture, something stirred in the deepest parts of my mind. "Veltar," I whispered. "The dreaming fleet." "Dreaming fleet?" "They're old. Older than the Empire. They were the first to master memory light, to build ships that thought and dreamed." I pressed my palms against the viewport, feeling the starlight scars respond to their presence. "They're beautiful." "They're also powering weapons," Rin reported. "Energy readings off the charts." A communication came through, not radio, but pure thought transmitted through quantum fields. When it touched my mind, I saw colors that had no names and heard music written in mathematics. "Archive of the False Empire. You carry the poison gift of your makers. Why do you wake? Why do you come to the place of ending? Asterisk." I tried to respond, but the thoughts that came weren't my own. "I seek understanding. I seek the truth of what I am." Asterisk. "Truth is a luxury the dead cannot afford. Your empire fell because it tried to make gods of mortals, to trap the infinite in finite flesh. You are the result of that blasphemy, a living violation of natural law." Asterisk. "They're not happy to see you," Dax observed. "The Veltar remember the War of Enlightenment." The alien thoughts continued. When your empire tried to harvest our memory light, to steal our dreams and make them weapons, we destroyed your fleets then. We will destroy you now. Asterisk. The organic ships began to move, taking up attack positions around us. Their weapons, if they could be called weapons, began to glow with the same bioluminescent patterns as their hulls. Can we run? I asked. Not in the deep dark, Rin said. No hyperspace lanes, no nav beacons. They know these graveyards better than we do. I closed my eyes, reaching deeper into whatever the Empire had made me. The pendant burned against my chest, and suddenly I could feel them, not just the Veltar ships, but the minds within them. Ancient beings who had watched galaxies die and be reborn, whose thoughts moved in spirals through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. And they were afraid. Not of me, but of what I represented. The Empire's final experiment, the ultimate archive, designed not just to store memories, but to rewrite reality itself. I'm not your enemy, I broadcast, pouring every ounce of sincerity into the thought. I don't even remember being part of the Empire. I'm just trying to understand who I am. Understanding is the first step toward repetition. Your predecessors said the same words before they began their harvest. Asterisk. My predecessors? The lead Veltar ship pulsed brighter. You are not the first archive to awaken. Every few years, another sleeps and dreams themselves into existence. Most die quickly. The galaxy is not kind to memory light. But some survive long enough to remember what they were made for. Asterisk. And what's that? To be the seed of a new empire, to carry the genetic templates and cultural memories needed to rebuild what was lost. You are not a person archive. You are a weapon, a living contingency plan. Asterisk. The words hit me like ice water. Not a person, a weapon. Everything I'd felt, everything I'd experienced, was it real or just programming? But then I thought of Kira's smile, of Dax's pain, of Rin's nervous energy. The connections I'd felt, the loyalty I'd begun to develop. Those were real, weren't they? Show us, the Veltar demanded. Show us that you are different from those who came before. Prove you will not follow the path of empire. Asterisk. How? Surrender yourself to us. Let us dissolve the poison gift in memory fire. Die as a person rather than live as a weapon. Asterisk. Behind me, Dax's hand moved to his sidearm. Like hell. But the choice wasn't his to make. It was mine. I looked at my hands, at the starlight scars that marked me as something other than human, at the pendant that connected me to an empire I'd never chosen to serve, at the power humming beneath my skin, waiting to reshape reality according to ancient protocols. The Veltar were probably right. I probably was a weapon, a living contingency plan designed to resurrect something better, left dead. But I was also something else, something the Empire hadn't planned for. I was someone who cared about the crew of this ship, someone who had chosen to call for help rather than surrender to the Warhammers, someone who was making decisions based on connection rather than programming. Maybe that made me more than the sum of my imperial parts. I won't surrender, I told the Veltar, but I will make you a promise. Speak, asterisk. I will go to Empire's End. I will learn what I am and what I was made for, and then I will choose, not according to imperial protocol, but according to my own judgment, what to do with that knowledge. And if you choose wrong, if you become what your makers intended? Asterisk. I looked at Dax, saw the pain in his eyes as he remembered the choice he'd made 30 years ago. Then you'll know where to find me. The Veltar ships held their positions for what felt like hours. Their bioluminescent patterns shifted through complex cascades of meaning, a debate conducted in colors and harmonics. Finally, their response came. You may pass, Archive, but know that we will be watching, the first sign that you follow the imperial path, and we will end you. Asterisk. The organic ships began to disperse, fading back into the darkness between stars like dreams upon waking. Well, Kira said into the sudden quiet. That was unexpectedly philosophical for a death threat. But as we resumed course for Empire's End, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Veltar had shown me mercy I didn't deserve. Because deep in my mind, beneath the growing fragments of memory, I could feel something stirring, something vast and patient and utterly certain of its purpose. The Empire wasn't just in my genes or my neural patterns, it was in my dreams. And with every passing hour, those dreams were becoming more vivid, more detailed, more real. By the time we reached Empire's End, would I still be the person who had awakened on that derelict ship? Or would I be something else entirely? Empire's End was not a place. It was a wound. As we dropped out of hyperspace, the first thing I saw was the absence. A perfect sphere of nothingness where a solar system should have been. No stars, no planets, no debris. Just a bubble of absolute void carved out of reality itself. "What happened here?" Rin whispered, his voice small in the face of such devastation. "The final protocol," Dax said grimly. "Whatever the Empire's last act was, it didn't just destroy this system, it erased it." But as we drew closer, I began to see that the void wasn't empty. Structures hung in the darkness, geometric shapes that hurt to look at, their angles folding in on themselves in ways that violated three-dimensional space. And at the center of it all, a single massive construct, a sphere of black metal covered in the same glowing symbols that marked my skin. "The Archive Nexus," I breathed, the name coming to me unbidden. "Where all the memories were supposed to be gathered." Supposed to be? I pressed my hands against the viewport, and the starlight scars along my arms blazed in response. Suddenly, I wasn't on the ship anymore. I was floating in that void, seeing through different eyes, experiencing a memory that wasn't my own. 30 years ago. Thousands of archive ships gathering around the Nexus, their crews filled with purpose and anticipation. They had been called to participate in something glorious, the preservation of everything the Empire had been, encoded into quantum crystalline matrices that would survive any catastrophe. But something had gone wrong. The first sign was the screaming. Not audible sound, but psychic feedback as the archives began linking their minds to the Nexus. They had expected to share their memories, to create a collective consciousness that would guide the Empire's rebirth. Instead, they found something else already waiting in the quantum foam, something vast and hungry and utterly alien. The Nexus wasn't just a storage device, it was a trap. I snapped back to the present, gasping. Kira grabbed my arm, her face full of concern. "What did you see?" "A lie," I said. "The final protocol wasn't about preserving the Empire. It was about feeding something else." The ship's sensors began picking up energy readings from the Nexus. Faint, but growing stronger as we approached. "There's still someone alive in there," Rin reported. "Multiple biosigns, but strange. Dispersed." Dispersed how? Like they're spread across the entire structure. Consciousness without discrete physical forms. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the void around us. The archives, they're still connected to the Nexus. After 30 years, they're still connected. As if summoned by my words, a communication began. Not radio, not quantum entanglement, but something deeper. A direct neural link that bypassed my conscious mind and spoke to the Imperial protocols buried in my genetic code. "Archive Prime, you have come at last. Asterisk." The voice was familiar and wrong. Dozens of voices speaking in unison, harmonizing in ways that suggested a shared consciousness. "Who are you?" "We are what remains, the final guardians of Imperial memory, the last keepers of the flame." Asterisk. Images flooded my mind, the archives who had answered the final protocol's call, their individual identities slowly dissolving as the Nexus integrated their consciousness into something larger. They had become a collective intelligence, part machine, part human, part something else. "We have been waiting for you, Archive Prime, the one who carries the complete genetic template, the one who can finish what we started." Asterisk. "I don't want to finish anything. I just want to understand." "Understanding will come." First, you must join us. Link your consciousness to the Nexus. Share your memories as we have shared ours. Asterisk. The pendant at my throat began to pulse in rhythm with the Nexus's energy output. I could feel the pull, the almost irresistible urge to surrender myself to that collective consciousness. It would be so easy. No more questions, no more loneliness, no more uncertainty about who I was or what I was meant to do. Just the warm embrace of shared purpose. "He's not going anywhere," Dax said, his hand on my shoulder. "Whatever that thing is offering, it's not worth the price." But the collective's attention turned to him, and suddenly the scarred captain was lifted off his feet, held suspended by invisible force. His partial neural patterns, the fragments that remained from his time as an archive, connected him to the Nexus just enough to make him vulnerable. "Dax Corin," the voices said with disappointment. "Archive 7 of the Meridian Sector. You abandoned your duty. You chose personal desire over imperial necessity." "Damn right I did," Dax snarled, even as the psychic pressure began to crush him, "and I'd do it again. You cost us critical genetic templates when you burned your neural pathways, military strategies from the Outer Rim campaigns, cultural memories from 3 extinct species, all lost because you chose to love one mortal woman. Asterisk. "She had a name," Dax gasped. "Lyra. Her name was Lyra, and she was worth more than your whole damn empire." I felt something break inside me. Not physically, but conceptually. The certainty I'd been feeling, the pull of the Nexus, suddenly seemed hollow and wrong. These beings spoke of people as resources, of love as inefficiency, of individual choice as betrayal. They weren't preserving what was best about the Empire. They were preserving what was worst. "Let him go," I said, stepping forward. "You are not yet integrated, Archive Prime. You do not command here. Asterisk. Maybe not, but I can choose." I reached deep into the starlight patterns beneath my skin, feeling for the connection that linked me to every archive who had ever lived. The genetic memories, the cultural templates, the vast repository of imperial knowledge. It was all there, waiting to be unlocked. But instead of surrendering to it, I began to reshape it. The Nexus had expected me to feed it my memories, to add my consciousness to their collective. Instead, I started pulling their memories into myself. Not to join them, but to understand them, to see what they had become and why. The collective reeled in shock. "What are you doing? This is not the protocol." Through their shared consciousness, I saw the truth. The final protocol hadn't been designed by the Empire at all. It had been engineered by something else, an intelligence from beyond the galactic rim that fed on organized thought and cultural memory. It had whispered to the Empire's leaders in their final days, offering them immortality in exchange for gathering all the archives in one place. The Empire's leaders had thought they were preserving their civilization. Instead, they had delivered it as a meal to a hungry god. "You cannot comprehend what we have become," the collective insisted. "We are beyond mortal limitations, beyond the weakness of individual desire." Asterisk. "You're beyond humanity," I replied, still drawing their memories into myself. "And that's exactly what's wrong with you." Through the shared link, I felt Dax's pain as the psychic pressure increased. Kira and Rin were trying to reach him, but invisible barriers held them back. The collective was using Dax as leverage, trying to force me to submit. They had made a critical error. They thought I was just another archive, programmed to value imperial survival above all else. They were wrong. I was something new, something the Empire hadn't planned for and the alien intelligence couldn't predict. I was an archive who had learned to care about individuals more than civilizations. Reaching deeper into the power patterns beneath my skin, I found the quantum threads that connected every archive to the imperial genetic template. The collective expected me to use this connection to join them. Instead, I used it to set them free. One by one, I began severing the neural links that bound them to the Nexus. Not violently, that would have killed them, but gently, like a surgeon removing diseased tissue. With each connection I cut, individual consciousness began to reassert itself within the collective. Stop, they screamed. You are destroying 30 years of integration, 30 years of perfect unity. Asterisk. I'm giving you back your names, I said. The first to break free was a woman who had once been Archive 12 of the Inner Colonies. As her individual identity reasserted itself, she began to sob, the first purely human sound to emerge from the Nexus in decades. Elena, she whispered. My name is Elena Vasquez. I had a daughter. Where is my daughter? Individual identity is weakness. The remaining collective protested. We showed you perfection, unity of purpose, clarity of mission. Asterisk. You showed me slavery, I replied, continuing to cut the neural links, dressed up in pretty words. More archives began to break free. As their individual personalities reasserted themselves, the collective's grip on the Nexus weakened. The psychic pressure holding Dax lessened, and he dropped to the deck, gasping. But the alien intelligence behind the final protocol wasn't finished. As the collective dissolved, something else began to emerge from the quantum foam. Something vast and hungry and utterly without human compassion. The ship's hull began to buckle as reality itself warped around us. Outside the viewport, the geometric structures in the void started moving, repositioning themselves into a pattern that hurt to look at. It's waking up, Elena's voice came through the comm, weak but determined. The thing that's been feeding on us. Our dissolution is calling it to full consciousness. Can we stop it? Not we. You. You're the Archive Prime. You carry the complete template. You can rewrite the protocol itself. I felt the weight of that responsibility settle on my shoulders like a physical thing. To rewrite the final protocol, I would have to integrate fully with the Nexus. I would have to become what the Empire had always intended me to be, not just an archive, but a living repository of an entire civilization's knowledge and power. The cost would be everything I had become since awakening on that derelict ship. Everything I had learned about friendship, loyalty, and individual choice. There has to be another way, Kira said, reading the conflict in my face. There is, Dax said quietly. But you're not going to like it. He was standing now, one hand pressed against the wall to steady himself. The other held something I hadn't seen before. A small device covered in the same symbols that marked my skin. Neural disruptor, he said. I've been carrying it for 30 years. One pulse, and it'll sever every archive connection in the system, including yours. That would kill me. Maybe. Or maybe it would just make you human. His smile was sad. Give you the chance I never had. To choose who you want to be, instead of letting your programming choose for you. The alien intelligence was fully awakening now. Through the viewport, I could see reality fracturing around the Nexus. Space itself was becoming something else. A feeding ground where thought and memory could be harvested directly from the quantum foam. If that thing fully manifests in our dimension, Elena warned, it won't stop with the Empire's memories. It'll consume every intelligent species in the galaxy. I looked at my hands. The starlight scars were blazing so brightly now that they cast shadows on the walls. The power to rewrite reality pulsed beneath my skin, waiting to be unleashed. I could save the galaxy. All I had to do was surrender everything that made me, me. Or I could choose to be human and let someone else find another way. Your choice, kid, Dax said, holding up the neural disruptor. Be a god or be a person. But choose quickly. Through the hull, something vast and impossible brushed against our ship. When it touched us, I felt its hunger, endless, patient, absolutely certain that all consciousness in the universe existed solely to feed its appetite. And in that moment, I finally understood what the Empire had really been. Not a civilization, but a farming operation. A way to cultivate and organize intelligent life so it could be more efficiently harvested. The archives weren't preserving culture, they were preparing it for consumption. I was supposed to be the final course. Kira, I said, turning to the engineer who had saved me from the Warhammers. Can you get the freed archives off the Nexus? Maybe, if I have enough time. Rin, can you get us to minimum safe distance? Define safe when dealing with eldritch horrors. Far enough that when this thing explodes, we might survive. Wait, Dax said. What are you planning? I smiled, and for the first time since awakening, I felt completely certain of who I was and what I needed to do. Something the Empire never taught me, I said. I'm going to choose sacrifice over survival. The pendant at my throat grew so hot it nearly burned my skin. But instead of removing it, I pressed it closer. Let the Imperial patterns flow through me one last time. Let the starlight scars connect me to every archive who had ever lived, every memory that had ever been preserved, every fragment of cultural DNA that made up the Imperial legacy. And then I gave it all away. Not to the alien intelligence, not to the collective, to the quantum foam itself, scattering the Empire's accumulated knowledge like seeds on the cosmic wind, ensuring that no single entity could ever again claim ownership of an entire civilization's worth of memories. The alien intelligence screamed, a sound that existed in dimensions beyond human perception. As its carefully prepared meal dissolved into chaos, it began to retreat back to whatever realm it had emerged from, but not before leaving one final gift. As the creature departed, it lashed out with pure malevolence. The psychic backlash hit me like a physical blow, and I felt something fundamental tear inside my mind. The starlight scars went dark. The pendant crumbled to ash. And for the first time since awakening, I felt truly alone inside my own head. Is it over? Kira asked. I looked at my hands. The scars were fading, becoming ordinary marks on ordinary skin. The vast repository of Imperial knowledge was gone, scattered beyond recovery. The connection to the Nexus had been severed. I was nobody special anymore. Just a man with gaps in his memory and friends who cared about him. Yeah, I said. It's over. We spent 3 days rescuing the freed archives from the collapsing Nexus. Most were in shock. 30 years of collective consciousness had left them struggling to remember how to be individuals. Elena Vasquez was among the strongest, helping to organize the evacuation, while searching desperately for any trace of the daughter she'd left behind. The Nexus itself was dying. Without the alien intelligence to maintain its impossible geometry, the structure was falling apart in ways that violated several laws of physics. Chunks of black metal simply vanished, taking portions of local spacetime with them. We need to get clear, Rin warned from the pilot station. The quantum fields are destabilizing. If we're still here when that thing collapses completely. How long? I asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. I looked at the scanner readings. We'd managed to evacuate 47 archives, but the biosigns showed at least a dozen more still trapped in the deepest sections of the Nexus. People who had been so deeply integrated into the collective that severing their connections might have left them catatonic. People we could save if we had more time. Go, I told Dax. Get the survivors clear. What about you? I was already moving toward the airlock, grabbing a vac suit from the emergency locker. Someone needs to get the others. Like hell. Kira caught my arm. You barely survived dissolving that collective. Your neural patterns are still fluctuating. Another psychic shock could kill you. Maybe. But leaving them is definitely going to kill them. Dax studied my face for a long moment. You know, when I first met you, I thought you might be dangerous. A weapon waiting to go off. And now? Now I think you're something worse. His smile was sad. You're a good man. The rescue shuttle was small, fast, and designed for exactly this kind of operation. As I piloted it toward the dying Nexus, I felt the absence where the Imperial knowledge used to be. No vast database of tactical information to draw on, no genetic memories of similar situations, just my own judgment and the hope that it would be enough. The Nexus's interior was a maze of collapsing corridors and reality distortions. Emergency lighting flickered in patterns that hurt to look at, and the artificial gravity kept shifting directions as the structure's quantum foundations crumbled. I found the first survivor in what had once been a memory processing chamber. A young man, barely 20, curled in a corner and muttering in a language that might have been ancient Veltar. When I touched his shoulder, he looked at me with eyes that held the confusion of someone trying to remember how to be a single person. Who am I? He whispered. I don't know, I said honestly. But you're alive, and that's what matters right now. The next two were easier, a middle-aged woman and an elderly man who had retained enough individual identity to walk under their own power. But they were all suffering from integration psychosis, struggling to process memories that belonged to dozens of other people. As we made our way back toward the shuttle, the Nexus shuddered around us. Cracks appeared in the walls, bleeding light that wasn't quite the right color. Is this real? The young man asked, staring at his own hands. Are we real? Or are we still part of the collective? I almost answered automatically, then stopped. Without the Imperial knowledge base, I couldn't be certain of anything. I was just guessing, hoping, choosing to believe in the reality I could touch and see. I don't know, I said again. But real or not, I care what happens to you. That has to count for something. We found the last group in the central processing core, 5 archives who had been so deeply integrated they were barely conscious. Loading them into the shuttle required cutting through quantum crystalline matrices that screamed when they broke. By the time we cleared the Nexus, the structure was coming apart at the subatomic level. Sections of hull simply ceased to exist, leaving wounds in space itself. As our shuttle raced toward the safety of Dax's ship, I watched the final collapse in the rear viewport. The Nexus didn't explode. It just stopped. One moment it was there, a sphere of impossible architecture. The next, there was only empty space and the fading afterglow of quantum decay. Any regrets? Kira asked as we docked. I thought about it. Without the Imperial patterns, I was nobody special. Just a man with convenient amnesia and friends who'd saved his life. I couldn't reshape reality or commune with ancient alien intelligences. I couldn't preserve civilizations or command fleets. But I could choose who to save. I could decide what mattered. I could be the kind of person who went back for stragglers, even when it was dangerous. No, I said. No regrets. The rescued archives were traumatized, but alive. Over the following weeks, as we made our way to the nearest inhabited system, many began to recover their individual identities. Elena Vasquez learned that her daughter had grown up, married, and had children of her own. The young man, who remembered that his name was Marcus, discovered a talent for engineering that had nothing to do with Imperial programming. Some chose to stay with us, forming the core of what would eventually become a refugee assistance network. Others decided to return to their homeworlds, carrying with them the knowledge that consciousness was too precious to be surrendered to any collective, no matter how glorious it promised to be. And me? I chose to stay with the crew of the sanctuary. Dax needed an archivist, someone to help catalog the cultural memories we were saving before they were lost forever. Kira could use an extra pair of hands in engineering. Rin appreciated having someone who didn't panic during emergencies. It wasn't the destiny the Empire had planned for me, but it was mine. 3 months after Empire's end, we received a message from the Veltar. The Dreaming Fleet had been monitoring the quantum disturbances, and their philosophers wanted to meet the Archive who had chosen dissolution over integration. You interest us, their message said. Most Imperial constructs seek to preserve themselves above all else. You chose to scatter your gifts rather than hoard them. This suggests wisdom. When we met them at the border of Veltar space, their ships were even more beautiful than I remembered. Organic architecture that flowed like music, hulls that shifted color with the thoughts of their crews. Their leader was an ancient being whose name was a symphony of harmonized tones. When they spoke, their words carried the weight of eons. You have proven that memory can choose its own path. That consciousness need not be enslaved to the patterns that birthed it. For this, we offer you a gift. Asterisk. They showed me their memory gardens, vast spaces where cultural knowledge grew like living things, tended by gardeners who understood that the most beautiful thoughts were those allowed to evolve naturally. No forced integration, no collective consciousness. Just the organic interplay of individual minds choosing to share their gifts. This is what memory should be, they explained. Not a weapon or a prison, but a garden where new ideas can take root. Asterisk. I spent 2 days among the Veltar, learning their philosophy of conscious choice. When I left, they gave me a seed, literally and metaphysically, a fragment of their memory garden technology, adapted for human neural patterns. What will you do with it? Kira asked as we departed Veltar space. I looked at the seed, a small crystalline thing that pulsed with gentle light. Plant gardens, I said. Help people preserve what matters to them without losing who they are. Sounds like a good life. Yeah, it does. 2 years after the fall of the Nexus, I stood in the observation deck of the sanctuary, watching the stars wheel slowly past. We were en route to the periphery worlds, a collection of colonies that had lost contact with the galactic core during the Empire's final war. Their archives had been destroyed, their cultural heritage scattered to the cosmic winds. We were going to help them remember. Not through imperial protocols or forced integration, but through the memory gardens I'd learned to cultivate. Spaces where people could share their stories voluntarily, where collective knowledge could grow without consuming individual identity. Still no memories of your original name? Elena asked, joining me at the viewport. She'd become the expedition's cultural liaison, helping traumatized communities begin the healing process. None, I said. Sometimes I catch fragments. A voice calling something that might have been my name, a face that might have been family, but nothing concrete. Does it bother you? I considered the question. In the beginning, the amnesia had felt like a fundamental violation. To exist without context, without the basic knowledge of who I had been, it should have been terrifying. But over time, I'd come to see it differently. My forgotten past was like a blank page, offering the freedom to write my own story rather than follow someone else's script. No, I said finally. I think I prefer it this way. Through the viewport, I could see our destination growing larger, a small blue world orbiting a yellow star. The colonists there had sent a desperate message months ago, describing how their children were growing up without stories, without any sense of where they'd come from. We could fix that, not by imposing imperial culture or alien philosophies, but by helping them remember their own stories, the ones that mattered to them. What should I call you? Elena asked. In the reports, I mean. I can't just keep writing the former Archive Prime. I touched the place where the imperial pendant had once hung. The skin was unmarked now, just another part of me. Call me Keeper, I said. Someone who helps others hold on to what they value. Keeper. She tested the name, found it fit. I like it. Behind us, footsteps approached. Dax emerged from the ship's deeper sections, carrying a data pad and wearing the expression he got when he'd discovered something interesting. You need to see this, he said, handing me the pad. It's from the colonial archives we recovered on Meridian Station. Cultural data from Earth's early expansion period. The screen showed a genealogical record, tracking family lines from Earth's earliest space colonies. Most of the names meant nothing to me, but one entry made my breath catch. Lucas Chen Vasquez, born Earth Colony 7. Disappeared during the archive program recruitment, standard year 2387. Elena leaned over to read the screen. Chen Vasquez. That's my family name. My great-grandfather's line. We stared at each other, processing the implications. If the records were accurate, if the genetic markers matched, then we were cousins, I said quietly. Distant cousins, but family. Is that possible? The archive program targeted specific genetic lines, Dax said. Families with unusual neural plasticity. It makes sense they'd recruit from the same bloodlines. I looked at Elena, really looked at her. We shared the same dark eyes, the same stubborn set to the jaw. How had I not seen it before? But more importantly, what did it mean? I'd spent 2 years building a chosen family with the crew of the sanctuary, People who cared about me despite not knowing my origins. Now I'd found actual blood relatives, connections to a past I'd thought was lost forever. "So," Elena said carefully, "Lucas Chen Vasquez. Is that who you want to be?" I tested the name silently, feeling how it fit. Lucas. It was a good name, with weight and history behind it. It connected me to Earth, to Elena, to a lineage that stretched back to humanity's homeworld. But it was also a name chosen by someone else, for someone who no longer existed. The Lucas who had volunteered for the archive program was gone, dissolved in quantum foam and imperial programming. I was what remained, something new, built from the fragments of his sacrifice. "No," I said finally, "that's who I was, but I've chosen who I am now." Elena smiled, and in that expression I saw an understanding that went deeper than genetics. She'd made her own choice to be Elena rather than Archive 12. The name we claimed mattered less than the life we built around it. "Keeper it is, then," she said. "Welcome to the family, cousin." As our ship began its final approach to the colonial world below, I felt a completeness I hadn't experienced since awakening on that derelict. Not because I'd recovered my past, but because I'd finally built a future worth having. The pendant was gone, the scars had faded, and the imperial programming had been scattered to the winds. But the connections I'd forged with this crew, this mission, this chosen family, those were real. Those would endure. Through the viewport, the colony world turned slowly beneath its sun. Somewhere down there, people were waiting for us to help them remember their stories. Children who had never heard the myths of their ancestors. Elders who carried traditions in their hearts but lacked the tools to pass them on. We would help them build memory gardens. Spaces where knowledge could grow without consuming those who tended it. Where the past could inform the future without enslaving it. It was good work. Important work. The kind of purpose I'd never found in imperial protocols or genetic programming. "Final approach," Rin called from the pilot station. "Colony Control is requesting our intentions." "Tell them," I said, "that we're gardeners. We've come to help them plant seeds." As the sanctuary descended through the atmosphere, I caught my reflection in the viewport glass. A man with no scars, no glowing symbols, no supernatural connections to cosmic forces. Just someone who'd chosen to help preserve what mattered while letting go of what didn't. They called me Keeper. Perhaps that name would stick, become the story people told about the man who helped them remember their own stories. But if the void whispered a different name, if somewhere in the quantum foam, fragments of Lucas Chen Vasquez still dreamed of home, I hoped he would understand the choice I'd made. To be human, rather than imperial. To choose connection over power. To tend gardens rather than build empires. If you found yourself at the crossroads between what you were made to be and what you chose to become, which path would you take? The stars held no answers, but they didn't need to. Some questions were meant to be lived rather than solved. And I had all the time in the universe to live mine. 10 years later. The memory garden on New Haven had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when we first planted its seeds. What began as a simple archive facility had evolved into something unprecedented. A living repository where the colony's stories grew and changed organically, tended by volunteers who understood that memory was not just preservation, but transformation. I stood in the garden's heart, watching children listen to stories told by elders whose families had fled the Empire's fall. The tales were different each time, growing, evolving, adapting to new listeners and new needs. This was how culture should survive. Not frozen in amber, but flowing like water, taking the shape of each vessel that held it. "Still no regrets?" Kira asked, finding me among the crystalline story trees that housed the colony's collective memories. "About what?" "Giving up godhood for gardening." I smiled, touching one of the crystal branches. Inside, I could see flickers of light, fragments of stories about a baker who had invented new breads for colony life, an engineer who had learned to sing to the atmospheric processors, a child who had drawn pictures of the stars that helped her parents navigate their grief. These stories will outlive empires, I said. They'll grow and change and inspire new stories in people we'll never meet. That seems more like godhood than anything the empire ever offered. Word had reached us recently of other gardens taking root across the galaxy. The Veltar had shared their techniques with species that had never heard of human civilization. Former archives like Elena had established preservation networks that spanned dozens of worlds. Even some of the Warhammer clans had abandoned memory hunting in favor of memory keeping, trading their harvesting equipment for story seeds. Not because anyone had forced them to change, but because they'd seen something beautiful growing and wanted to be part of it. "Message for you," Rin called from the garden's communication center. "Long-range signal from the deep core." I made my way to the comm station, wondering who could be reaching us from the galaxy's most heavily populated region. The signal was weak, filtered through dozens of relay stations, but clear enough to understand. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the exploration vessel Remembrance. We've heard about your memory gardens. Our ship carries refugees from the Cygnus sector, people who lost everything when their sun went nova. They need help rebuilding their cultural identity. Would you be willing to assist? Asterisk. Chen. Another family name that echoed in the genetic databases. Another distant cousin, perhaps, carrying on the work of preservation in her own way. "Tell Captain Chen we'll be there," I said, "and ask if she needs any story seeds for the journey." As Rin transmitted our reply, I felt the familiar satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. Somewhere in the deep core, people were struggling to remember who they were after losing everything they'd built. We could help, not by imposing our stories on them, but by giving them the tools to discover their own. "The sanctuary is prepped for long-range travel," Dax reported, joining us at the comm station. "Elena's team has loaded enough garden seeds to establish a dozen facilities. And our young archives? Marcus has finished his engineering certification. Says he wants to design memory storage systems that feel more like living trees than databases." Dax smiled. "Kid's got vision." I looked around the garden one last time before we departed. New Haven's stories would continue growing in our absence, tended by people who understood their value. That's how it should be. Memory is a living thing, cared for by communities rather than hoarded by individuals. As we lifted off from New Haven's surface, I caught sight of my reflection in the viewport, still unmarked by imperial scars, still free of supernatural connections, just a man who'd learned to tend seeds instead of commanding fleets. The stars ahead held new gardens waiting to be planted, new stories waiting to be preserved and shared. In the deep core, Captain Sarah Chen was carrying refugees who needed help remembering how to hope. We would go to them, not as conquerors or saviors, but as gardeners. People who understood that the most beautiful things grew slowly, in their own time, when tended with patience and love. They called me Keeper, guardian of memories, tender of stories. It was a good name, a chosen name, and in the space between stars, where quantum foam held the scattered fragments of empires and dreams, I sometimes heard whispers of other names I might have been. Lucas, Archive Prime, Child of the Empire. But those belonged to someone else now, someone who had made different choices, walked different paths. I was exactly who I'd chosen to become. And if you found yourself floating in the void between what you were and what you could be, if the universe offered you the choice between power and purpose, between conquest and cultivation, what would you choose? The stars didn't answer. They never did. But in the quantum foam between them, new stories were always beginning,